السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. معكم أخوكم محمد الخميس إكس كونسلتنج انترن في أوليفر ويمن. واليوم we will be tackling a case similar to the cases you might get في الcase interviews. في الcase interviews. So ممكن تلاحظوا ان انا بحول بعض الاحيان بين العربي والانجليزي، واتمنى انه ما يزعجكم الموضوع، لكن I will be trying to focus on English لان because it's the main language used in case interviews, so taking this as a practice. So let's start with the case. So usually um, the interviewer would start the case by telling you an introduction about the client and about the project they are trying to do or the problem they are facing, and then you will start your analysis. So Bismillah. So the case here is that the client is a national plastic manufacturer in the US. Their customers are supermarkets and discount retailers. They are looking to outsource manufacturing to China, but the CEO is concerned because no one else in the industry has done this yet. Should we recommend to our client to outsource to China or not? So usually after having the introduction about the case, if you have any questions that you want to understand, this is the right time to ask these questions. A right question here, or a clarifying question here could be, what are the products that we are manufacturing that we want to outsource or that we are considering to outsource? So here we can see that we have freezer bags, plastic plates, and specialty plates. So when you ask this kind of question, the interviewer would usually give you the question. Sometimes, if it's not relevant, the interviewer would tell you that this is not a relevant question. Another example of a clarifying question that could be asked here is, for example, is this manufacturer only selling to US based clients, or are we also exporting abroad? So after having clarified anything that you need, you would usually ask the interviewer for a couple of moments to be able to build your framework. So what you would say to the interviewer is, could I please have a couple of moments to organize my thoughts? This is an example of what you can say, and then you would deep dive. Then you will develop your framework. So here, our framework is going to be that we want to look at cost savings. This is the first thing that we want to look at. And then we want to also look at the consumer preferences. And finally, we want to look at the brand risks and the public relations, or the public view of the company. So you would usually also have to justify why do you want to look at all of these aspects and explain what do you exactly want to know there. So for example, when it comes to cost savings, you would say that we want to look at the fixed and variable costs of producing in the US versus China. The different are we going to have any difference in costs when it comes to suppliers, transportation costs, and finally tariffs, since we will be importing these products, we might have to pay some tariffs. Then the second aspect that we will be looking at here is the consumer preferences, and we want to see if the quality is going to be affected when we outsource. And finally, when it comes to the brand risks, it could be something like, if we do this outsourcing, do we have to do any layoffs in the US? And if yes, is it going to affect our brand? So when you explain your framework, the interviewer would usually lead you to where to look at. Um, so, for example, when it comes to the consumer preferences, the interviewer would tell you, all right, so when it comes to quality for the freezer bags in China, they have lower quality. When it comes to plastic plates and specialty plates, they have the same quality. And for when it comes to consumer preferences, freezer bags, plastic bags are both commodity, but the quality is important for the freezer bags, but for plastic plates, the quality is not an issue. Consumers do not care that much about it. And finally, specialty plates, it's a seasonal business and it depends on the trend. So now we've covered everything everything related to the consumer preferences and quality. Looking at the third aspect here, the public relations and the brand risks, the interviewer would tell you here that the public relations is not a big or not a real issue. And then the interviewer would go with the main question here to test your abilities or and skills in math, which is the cost savings. So the interviewer would ask you to calculate the costs of outsourcing in China. So before going into the next slide, what the interviewer would expect from you to say is what are the costs? For example, we want to look at the labor costs. We want to look at the variable costs. We want to look at the material costs. We want to look at fixed costs, transportation. You would list all of these costs to the interviewer, and then the interviewer would tell you to look into what costs exactly. So here in our case, we can see that the costs are labor, material, variable cost, variable overhead, fixed overhead, and transportation. And then the interviewer would give you the labor costs, or sorry, the costs in the US, and then how much are they relative to the US. So you might have a question, and what's the point of having these costs in terms, these costs in China in terms of a percentage rather than in terms of dollars? Here, the point here is just to test your ability to or your skill to convert those easily from the US to China. So let's go one by one and how we should calculate it. So when it comes to labor, we can see that it costs us 30 cents in the US. However, in China, when it comes to wage, it is only 8% of the cost in the US. But at the same time, um, um, productivity in China is less by 20% than productivity in the US. So how do we account for this? So we will multiply 0.3, which is the cost in the US, multiplied by 8 over 100, which is the wage rate. And then we want now to account for the lost productivity. So what we would do is multiply it by 1.2, which is the 20%. How did we get the 1.2? It's just 10 over 8 because we've lost the 20% here. So this is when it comes to labor. Going into material, we can see that the costs are 30 cents for the plastic and for the other material it's 20 cents. Um, so this one is very basic. You will just multiply 0.3 by the relative cost in China, which is 80%. So you will multiply 30 cents by 80%. For the other material, it's the same thing, which is 0.2 multiplied by 0.75. For the variable overhead, here in our case, the variable overhead is it costs us more in China. So what we would do here, we can see here is that the cost is 140% of the costs in the US. So what we would do is just multiply the 5 cents, which is 0.05, by 1.4, which is the same as 140%. We would do the same for the fixed overhead, which is 0.1 multiplied by 0.6. And finally, Here we can see that the transportation from China to the US distribution centers is 6,000 to ship 40,000 pounds. So how do we convert it? So since we are doing these calculations in dollar, how much would each pound cost us? We will just divide 6,000 by 40,000 to get the cost per pound. And we can also see here that the US, the cost of distributing these items from the centers to the customers is not going to change if we outsource. So going into the next slide, we can see all of the calculations we did previously and the total cost per pound. We can see here that it is going to cost us 75 cents versus $1 in the US. So it will save us around 25% if we outsource um, these in China. So what after having all of these calculations, the interviewer would ask you to what would usually tell you something like we have a meeting with the CEO in 1 hour. What should be the recommendation that we tell the interviewer about? Sorry, we tell the CEO about. So here, having before saying your answer, what you would do is you will also ask for a couple of moments to organize your thoughts. And what we would do is list the things that we've mentioned before. Something like, so what I usually do is that I would write everything that we've did in bullet points. For example, I would say that now we've saved, if we outsource, we will be saving 25%. This is when it comes to costs. When it comes to quality, we've seen that for some of the products it's the same, for some it's worse, and for some of the products consumers care about quality and for others consumers don't. When it comes to public relations and brand risks, we said that it's not that important. So when listing all of these things, I would now form my recommendation. So what would be the recommendation here in basic words? We would say that after analyzing all of the inputs that we have, we recommend that we outsource to China. However, we don't want to outsource all of the products. We want to outsource paper and plastic plates, keeping the other lines in the US due to quality and trend issues. However, before making the final decision here, we should be looking into the risks associated with outsourcing in China, which is which are the things that we've mentioned before with the interviewer, and it would be something like um, brand risk, quality, change in fixed costs, etc. All the risks that we've covered before. And you would say what are the next steps that should be done at this moment. So it would be researching the risks mentioned before to determine whether it is beneficial to do this outsourcing or not, and then that would be the end of your case. um, Here I can give you an example of how a recommendation can be formed or what can be said, and now we've already covered this in a basic form, but it also can be said in another form, which is, for example, based on the case analysis, my recommendation to the CEO is that we proceed with outsourcing the production of paper and plastic plates to China, given the cost savings and comparable quality to the domestic production. However, it's advisable to retain the manufacturing of other product lines within the US to maintain quality standards and address trend sensitivity. Um, then, additionally, it's crucial to thoroughly research the potential risks mentioned, including changes in fixed overhead costs, additional manufacturing capacity needs, and potential public relations or brand image risks before making a final decision. And that's it. Congrats. We've solved the case. آم، وإن شاء الله أتمنى إنه يكون تكون هذه الكيس كانت واضحة و you've enjoyed it. Thank you for listening.